an impossible attraction, a rule that could destroy everything they've built. Sometimes love doesn't ask for permission, it simply demands to be felt, no matter the consequences. If this story touches you and sets your heart on fire, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Click "Thanks a lot" because your support helps us bring you more breathtaking romances like this one. The salty wind from Monterey Bay carried promises that Danielle didn't yet know how to decode. Sitting alone on the terrace of the Wharf's Edge restaurant, she watched the waves crash against the volcanic rocks, while the sun bid farewell to the California horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and pink that seemed to have come straight out of an impressionist painting. The coral dress she'd chosen for the evening danced gently with the ocean breeze, and she wondered if it had been a good idea to travel alone right after her turbulent breakup with Marcus. Just thinking about her ex-fiancé made Danielle feel a knot in her stomach. 3 years of relationship destroyed by obsessions with restrictive diets, excessive exercise, and a sick need to control every aspect of her life. "You need to be more disciplined, Danny," he used to say, analyzing every bite she took. "Success requires sacrifice." But what kind of success was that? One that sucked all spontaneity and joy out of life? Shaking her head to push those thoughts away, Danielle picked up her glass of chilled Chardonnay and let the golden liquid slide down her throat, bringing a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in a long time. This was her first night of true independence in years, and she was determined to make the most of it. "Sorry to interrupt your thoughts, but I couldn't help but notice that you're watching this sunset with the intensity of someone who truly understands its beauty." The masculine voice, deep and captivating, made Danielle look up. Before her stood a man who seemed to have stepped out of a movie. Dark brown hair slightly tousled by the wind, green eyes that reflected the golden light of dusk, and a smile that managed to be both confident and slightly shy. He wore a white linen shirt that highlighted the natural tan of his skin, and there was something in his posture that suggested familiarity with success, but without the arrogance that usually accompanied it. "Guilty," Danielle replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "I was trying to memorize every detail. Sometimes life gives us moments that deserve to be carefully treasured." He smiled more broadly, and Danielle noticed small laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested someone who knew how to genuinely laugh. "May I join you?" "I promise I'm also an appreciator of moments that deserve to be treasured." Without waiting for a verbal response, but reading the silent invitation in her gaze, he sat in the chair across from her. "Austin," he said, extending his hand. "Danielle," she replied, feeling a small electric shock when their hands touched. It was strange how a simple greeting could carry so much energy. "So, Danielle," Austin said, signaling to the waiter, "what brings an obviously intelligent and sophisticated woman to dine alone in Monterey Bay on a Thursday night?" She laughed, surprised by the direct question. "Newly discovered freedom," she answered honestly. "And you? What brings an obviously charming and mysterious man to interrupt strangers' dinners?" "Instinct," he said simply, ordering a red wine that Danielle had never heard of but sounded expensive. "Sometimes life puts people in our path exactly when we need them." As the night progressed, Danielle discovered that Austin possessed a rare combination of sharp intelligence and genuine humor. He spoke about travel with the passion of someone who truly absorbed the cultures he visited, not just collected passport stamps. When she mentioned her background in hotel management, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Hospitality is about creating memories," he said, absent-mindedly swirling the wine in his glass. "It's about understanding that people aren't just paying for a room or a meal. They're paying for how they feel when they're with us." "Exactly," Danielle exclaimed, feeling an excitement she hadn't experienced in a long time when discussing her career. "It's about anticipating needs they don't even know they have. It's about transforming the ordinary into extraordinary." Austin leaned forward, fascinated. "You really get it. Most people see hospitality as a service, but you see it as an art." There was something in the way he said it, an intensity in his gaze, that made Danielle's heart race. It was as if he was truly seeing her, not just hearing her words. When the waiter brought the dessert they decided to share, a crème brûlée with notes of vanilla and orange, Austin asked, "Can I make an embarrassing confession?" "Please do," Danielle said, breaking the caramelized crust with her spoon. "I saw you when you arrived here," he admitted, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she would find adorable if she knew it would become familiar. "How you were so lost in thought, so present in the moment. It was impossible not to notice. That's kind of stalkerish of you," she teased, but her smile indicated she didn't mind at all. "Completely stalkerish," he agreed, laughing. "But it was worth it. I haven't known you for even 3 hours, but I feel like we've had this conversation in another lifetime," Danielle finished, surprising herself with her honesty. They looked at each other in silence for a moment, the weight of this inexplicable connection hovering between them like something almost tangible. The restaurant had gradually emptied, but neither seemed to notice or care. "Want to walk on the beach?" Austin asked when they finally asked for the check, insisting on paying despite her protests. The beach was bathed in the silver light of the full moon, and their footprints in the wet sand were the only evidence of life in that piece of paradise. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the sound of the waves creating a perfect soundtrack for the moment. "Danielle," Austin said finally, stopping and turning to face her. The moonlight highlighted the contours of his face, and she could see something vulnerable in his eyes. "I know this might sound completely crazy, but—" "Say it," she whispered, feeling as if she were on the edge of something that would change everything. "I don't believe in coincidences," he said, taking a step closer. "And I definitely don't believe in love at first sight. But you—" He paused, as if he were choosing each word carefully. "You're making me question everything I thought I knew about human connections." Danielle's heart was beating so hard, she was sure he could hear it. "Austin, may I kiss you?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. In response, she moved closer, eliminating the distance between them. When their lips met, it was as if the entire universe made sense for the first time. The kiss began soft, almost hesitant, but quickly deepened when both realized that the chemistry between them was too real to be contained. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Austin rested his forehead against hers, and Danielle could feel the warmth of his breath mixing with the ocean breeze. "This definitely wasn't in my plans for this trip," she whispered. "Life's best moments never are," he replied, intertwining his fingers with hers. They spent the rest of the night walking on the beach, sharing stories, laughter, and stolen kisses under the starlight. It was the kind of night that only existed in romantic movies, but that had somehow become their reality. When Austin finally walked her back to the hotel, the sky was already beginning to lighten with the first rays of dawn. At her room door, they kissed once more, a long kiss loaded with silent promises. "Are you leaving tomorrow?" he asked, holding her hands as if he didn't want to let her go. "The day after tomorrow," she corrected. "To Chicago. New job, new life." Something passed quickly through his eyes. Surprise? Recognition? But disappeared so fast she thought she'd imagined it. "Chicago is an incredible city," he said finally. "I'm sure you'll kill it there." "And you, are you staying here in California?" Austin hesitated for a moment, and Danielle had the strange feeling that there was much more about him she still didn't know. "I travel a lot for work," he said vaguely. "Who knows, maybe our paths will cross again." When her room door closed behind her, Danielle leaned against the wood, still able to taste his lips on hers. There was something about Austin that seemed familiar and mysterious at the same time, as if she were destined to find him. But there were still secrets waiting to be discovered. Outside, in the hallway, Austin remained for a long moment, looking at the closed door, a complex expression on his face. He knew things about Danielle's future that she couldn't yet imagine, and part of him wondered if he should have told the truth about who he really was. But some revelations, he thought as he walked away, needed to wait for the right moment, and something told him that moment would come sooner than either of them could imagine. The flight from Monterey to Chicago felt endless, and Danielle spent every minute trying to convince herself that magical night had been real. Seated in the middle seat, between a businessman frantically typing on his laptop and an elderly woman snoring softly, she relived every moment with Austin. The taste of the wine he had chosen, the way his eyes sparkled when he laughed, the feeling of his fingers intertwined with hers as they walked on the cold sand. 3 days. Only 3 days had passed since that night, but it felt like an eternity. She had kept the restaurant napkin where he had doodled a small drawing while they talked, two waves meeting, and now the paper was carefully folded in her wallet, like a talisman from a life she might never experience again. "Stop it, Danielle," she murmured to herself, adjusting her seatbelt as the plane began its descent. "It was an incredible night with an incredible man you'll probably never see again. Now it's time to focus on the future." And what a future! The job at Hawthorne Resorts Group was everything she had dreamed of since her first day of college. One of the most prestigious hotel chains in the United States, known for its innovation, excellence in service, and a corporate culture that truly valued its employees. When she received the call offering her the position of Customer Experience Manager, she could hardly believe it. Chicago's airport welcomed her with its characteristic energy, people rushing in all directions, announcements echoing through the speakers, the aroma of coffee mixed with the metallic smell of air conditioning. Danielle took a taxi straight to her new apartment in River North, a small but charming studio that was only 15 minutes from Hawthorne's headquarters. The next morning, she woke up before her alarm, nerves and excitement mixing together. She carefully chose a navy blue outfit that made her feel professional and confident, pulled her hair back in an elegant bun, and checked her appearance in the mirror 3 times before leaving. The Hawthorne Resorts building was impressive. 40 floors of glass and steel that reflected Chicago's sky like a giant mirror. In the lobby, a modern fountain created a relaxing sound of flowing water, and the walls were decorated with photographs of their hotels around the world. It was exactly the kind of environment where she had always imagined herself working. "Danielle Morrison?" asked an elegant woman of about 40, appearing beside her with a warm smile. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, Director of Human Resources. Welcome to the Hawthorne family." "Nice to meet you, Jennifer," Danielle replied, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I'm very excited to get started." "And we're excited to have you with us," Jennifer said as she led her to the elevators. "Today you'll meet your team, get familiar with our systems, and at the end of the day you'll have a meeting with our CEO to discuss your vision for the department." "The CEO?" Danielle asked, surprised. It wasn't common for new employees, even in management positions, to have direct access to the CEO on their first day. "Austin Hawthorne is very involved with operations," Jennifer explained, pressing the button for the 32nd floor. "He believes in personally knowing each person who's going to lead an important area of the company. It's part of the culture he's created here, Austin Hawthorne." The name resonated in Danielle's mind like a distant echo, but she was so nervous about her first day that she didn't make the immediate connection. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introductions, orientations about company policies, and a mountain of forms to fill out. Her new team consisted of 6 talented and dedicated people, and she quickly realized she was entering an environment where excellence wasn't just expected, but cultivated. During lunch with Jennifer and some colleagues, she learned more about Hawthorne Resorts' unique culture. "Austin created some pretty specific policies," Jennifer explained while stirring her salad. "The most important one is the workplace relationship policy." "What do you mean?" Danielle asked, taking a sip of ice water. "Romantic relationships between employees are strictly prohibited," said Mark, the marketing director, with a slightly sarcastic tone. Austin implemented this a few years ago after seeing how poorly managed relationships at other companies hurt the professional environment. "It's a rigid policy," Jennifer added. "Any romantic relationship between employees results in immediate termination of both parties. No exceptions." Danielle nodded, mentally filing away this information. It seemed like a severe policy, but she understood the logic behind it. Workplace relationships could really complicate professional dynamics. At 5 o'clock, Jennifer appeared at her desk with a smile. "Ready to meet the boss?" They went up to the 40th floor where the executive suite was located. The CEO's office occupied an entire corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the city. Jennifer led her through an elegant anteroom, where an efficient secretary greeted them with a wave. "He's finishing up a call," the secretary informed them. "You can go in a few minutes." Danielle used the time to compose herself, smoothing her skirt and checking if her lipstick was still in place. It was important to make a good first impression on the CEO, especially considering how personally involved he seemed to be with the company. "Ready?" Jennifer asked, knocking gently on the dark wooden door. "Come in," came the response from inside the office. Jennifer opened the door and signaled for Danielle to enter first. "Austin, I'd like to introduce our new customer experience manager, Danielle Morrison." Danielle stepped forward, a professional smile already formed on her lips, and looked up to greet her new boss. The world stopped. On the other side of the mahogany desk, slowly rising with an expression that mirrored exactly the shock she felt, was Austin. Not just any Austin, but her Austin. The man who had kissed her under the moonlight in Monterey Bay just 3 days ago. The man whose laughter still echoed in her dreams. The man she thought she'd never see again. Austin Hawthorne, of course. How had she not made the connection? The surname was literally in the company name. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity, they stared at each other in absolute silence. Danielle could feel her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. His green eyes, which had looked at her so tenderly that night on the beach, now reflected the same mixture of shock, recognition, and something she couldn't identify. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said finally, her voice coming out hoarser than intended. It's a pleasure to meet you." Austin blinked, as if coming out of a trance, and extended his hand. "Miss Morrison," he said, his voice professional but slightly tense. "Welcome to Hawthorne Resorts." When their hands touched for the greeting, it was as if an electric current passed between them. Danielle had to force herself not to show her reaction, but she could see in his eyes that he had felt the same thing. Jennifer, oblivious to the tension that had settled in the room, smiled. Danielle has impressive experience in hospitality and an innovative vision for customer experience. "I'm sure you two will work very well together." "I'm sure we will," Austin said, releasing Danielle's hand perhaps a second longer than necessary. "Please, have a seat." Danielle sat in the leather chair in front of his desk, trying desperately to maintain professional composure while her mind raced in 1,000 different directions. How was this possible? Of all the companies, of all the CEOs, it had to be him. "Jennifer, could you give us a few minutes?" Austin asked, and Danielle detected an almost imperceptible note of tension in his voice. "I'd like to discuss some specific ideas with Miss Morrison." "Of course," Jennifer said, standing up. "Danielle, it was a pleasure having you with us today. If you need anything, you know where to find me." When the door closed behind Jennifer, the silence that settled in the room was almost palpable. Austin leaned back in his chair, running his hand through his hair in the same gesture she had found adorable 3 nights ago. "So," he said finally, his voice low and careful, "Chicago." "You knew," Danielle said. It wasn't a question. "I knew you were coming to Chicago," he admitted. "But I didn't know. I didn't make the connection between Danielle Morrison and the Danny I met on the beach." "Danny?" she repeated softly. That's what he had started calling her in the second half of that magical night, and hearing the nickname from his lips again made her stomach flip. "Danielle," he corrected himself quickly, returning to formalism. "This is complicated." "Complicated is an understatement," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're my boss. You're the CEO of the company I just got hired by, and I kissed you under the moonlight 3 days ago," he finished for her, his voice almost a whisper. They stared at each other again, and Danielle could see the same internal war she was fighting reflected in his eyes. The attraction that had been so natural and obvious that night now seemed dangerous and forbidden. "The company policies," she said finally. "Exactly," he replied, standing and walking to the window, as if he needed to put physical distance between them. "Romantic relationships between employees are strictly prohibited. It's a policy I created myself." "How ironic," Danielle murmured. Austin turned to face her, and she could see the frustration and conflict in his expression. "Danielle, you need to know that when I met you that night, I had no idea who you were. If I had known, you wouldn't have approached me," she finished, feeling a pang of pain in her chest. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But now we're here, and we need to deal with the reality of the situation." Danielle stood up too, smoothing her skirt again in a nervous gesture. "So, what do we do now?" Austin returned to behind his desk, putting the physical barrier between them again. "Now we act like professionals. You're a talented employee with a lot to offer this company. I'm your CEO. That night in Monterey was Was what? She asked when he hesitated. It was perfect, he said softly. But it was also a moment outside of reality. Now we're back in the real world, with real responsibilities and real consequences. Danielle nodded, even though every fiber of her being protested against the idea of pretending that connection had never existed. You're right, of course, we're professional adults, we can handle this. We can, he agreed, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. So, Danielle said, forcing a business tone into her voice, would you like to discuss my vision for the customer experience department? Austin blinked, clearly struggling to change focus, but then nodded. Yes, of course. Please tell me about your ideas. For the next 20 minutes, they managed to maintain a professional conversation about customer service strategies, feedback implementation, and hospitality innovations. Danielle was impressed by his deep knowledge of every aspect of the business, and he seemed genuinely interested in her ideas. But beneath the surface of the professional conversation, there was a current of tension that neither could completely ignore. When she leaned forward to emphasize a point, she noticed his eyes lingering a second longer on her face. When he gestured while explaining a policy, she remembered how those same hands had touched hers. Your ideas are excellent, Austin said finally, looking at his watch. I'm looking forward to seeing how you implement them. Thank you, Danielle replied, standing to leave. I'm excited to get started. When she reached the door, he called out to her. Danielle. She turned, and for a moment she saw not the CEO of Hawthorne Resorts, but the man who had laughed with her about silly things while sharing dessert. Welcome to the team, he said simply. Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne, she replied, and then left the office before her professional resolve could waver. While waiting for the elevator, Danielle leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. 3 days ago, she had kissed this man under the stars and felt as if the universe had aligned perfectly. Now she had to work for him every day, pretending that night had never happened. Complicated doesn't even come close to describing this, she murmured to herself when the elevator doors opened. But as she descended back to her floor, a part of her, a part she was determined to ignore, couldn't stop thinking that maybe, just maybe, fate had other plans for them. Danielle's first few weeks at Hawthorne Resorts passed in a haze of meetings, reports, and a Herculean effort to keep her mind focused on work. Every morning, she mentally prepared herself for the possibility of running into Austin in the hallways, but somehow, their paths rarely crossed. It was as if he was deliberately avoiding any casual encounters, and she didn't know whether she felt relieved or disappointed by this. It was during a new employee orientation meeting in the 3rd week that Danielle truly understood the depth and origins of the company's anti-relationship policy. And now we come to our most important policy, said Sarah Chen, the compliance director, adjusting her glasses as she looked at the 8 new employees seated around the conference table. Policy 001, Workplace Relationships. Danielle felt her stomach tighten. She had read about this in the employee handbook, but something in Sarah's serious tone suggested there would be more details this time. This policy was personally implemented by our CEO, Austin Hawthorne, 3 years ago, Sarah continued, projecting a slide on the screen. And it's not just a suggestion, it's an absolute rule. Any romantic relationship between employees, regardless of hierarchy or department, results in immediate termination of both parties, with no possibility of appeal. Michael, a new financial analyst, raised his hand. Does that include relationships that started before being hired? Especially relationships that started before being hired, Sarah replied firmly. Transparency is key. If you're in a relationship with someone who works here, you must report it to human resources immediately. But why such a rigid policy? Asked Lisa from the marketing team. Many companies allow relationships as long as they're disclosed. Sarah paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. I'm going to tell you something that happened before many of you arrived here. Austin Hawthorne witnessed firsthand how poorly managed relationships can destroy not just careers, but entire companies. She changed the slide, now showing a photo of an elegant office building. Before founding Hawthorne Resorts, Austin worked for 5 years at Morrison & Associates. Yes, the same Morrison & Associates that was one of the largest hotel consulting firms on the West Coast. Danielle felt a chill. Her last name was Morrison, too, though she had no relation to that company. Austin was being groomed to become the next CEO, Sarah continued. He was young, brilliant, and had a revolutionary vision for the hospitality industry. But there was a problem. He was secretly involved with Rebecca, the founder's daughter, and also a senior executive. The room was in absolute silence. Danielle could feel her heart beating faster. The relationship was against company policies, but they thought they could keep it secret. For 2 years it worked. They were discreet, professional in public, and genuinely in love. But when the truth came out, Sarah paused dramatically. It was a disaster. There were accusations of favoritism, conflicts of interest, and an internal war that split the company in half. Rebecca claimed that Austin had used the relationship to gain access to confidential information. Austin said she had manipulated the situation to hurt his career when the relationship ended badly. What happened? Michael asked, clearly fascinated. The company imploded, lawsuits, media scandals, employees choosing sides. Within 6 months, Morrison & Associates lost 60% of its clients and closed its doors. Austin lost not just his job, but also his reputation in the industry. It took him years to rebuild. Danielle swallowed hard. Now she understood why Austin had created this policy. It wasn't just about maintaining professionalism. It was about protecting everything he had worked for from being destroyed again. That's why, Sarah said, returning to the policy slide, Austin Hawthorne has zero tolerance for workplace relationships. He built this company based on trust, transparency, and pure meritocracy. Nothing can compromise that. After the meeting, Danielle returned to her desk in shock. It wasn't just the policy that worried her, it was the story behind it. Austin hadn't created this rule out of whim or paranoia. He had created it because he had already lost everything once, because of a workplace relationship. That afternoon, she was reviewing customer satisfaction reports when Jennifer appeared at her desk. "Danielle, do you have a few minutes? Austin would like to review last quarter's numbers with you." Danielle's stomach did a flip. She hadn't been alone with Austin since that first meeting 3 weeks ago. "Of course," she said, saving the document and grabbing her files. Austin's office was exactly as she remembered. Elegant, professional, with those huge windows that offered a spectacular view of Chicago. But this time, when she entered, he wasn't behind his desk. Instead, he was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking down at the city below. "You wanted to see me?" she said, closing the door behind her. Austin turned, and she immediately noticed he looked tired. There were lines of tension around his eyes that hadn't been there in Monterey. "Yes, please sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. But instead of sitting behind the desk like last time, he chose the chair next to hers. "How are you adjusting?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that suggested the question was more personal than professional. "Very well," Danielle replied carefully. "The team is fantastic, and I'm loving the projects I'm working on." "And personally?" he asked, his green eyes meeting hers. "I know changes can be challenging." There were layers of meaning in that question, and they both knew it. "I'm adapting," she said simply. Austin nodded, but she could see he wanted to say more. "Danielle, I need to ask, did you learn about our relationship policy?" "Yes," she replied. "Sarah was very clear about it today at the orientation meeting." Something flashed quickly across his face. "Ah, the meeting was today. Did she tell the story? About Morrison & Associates?" "Yes." Austin closed his eyes for a moment. "Then you understand why this policy exists?" "I understand," Danielle said softly. "And I'm sorry for what you went through." He opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "That experience taught me that no matter how strong the feelings, no matter how genuine the connection, workplace relationships are a ticking time bomb." "Austin," she began, but he raised his hand. "Let me finish," he said, "because I need you to understand that this policy is non-negotiable. Not for you, not for me, not for anyone. I built this company from the ground up, and I won't allow it to be destroyed by feelings." The word feelings came from his lips as if it was something dangerous, and Danielle felt a pang of pain in her chest. "So you're telling me to forget that night," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm saying that night was a mistake, he replied, but there was something in his eyes that contradicted his words. A beautiful and perfect mistake, but still a mistake. Danielle stood up abruptly, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. A mistake, I see. Danielle, it's not like that, Austin began, standing up too. No, it's okay, she said, forcing a professional smile. You're right. It was a mistake. A night outside of reality that means nothing now that we're back in the real world. I didn't say it meant nothing, he said quietly. Then what did it mean? She asked, turning to face him. Because you're talking like it's something that needs to be erased from memory. Austin ran his hand through his hair. That gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of his internal frustration. It meant everything, he admitted finally. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. They stared at each other for a long moment, the tension between them almost palpable. Danielle could see the internal war he was fighting, the man who had laughed with her on the beach battling against the CEO who had learned to protect his heart and his company at any cost. So what do we do with this, she asked. Nothing, he said firmly. Absolutely nothing. You're a brilliant employee with a promising future at this company. I'm your CEO. That's it. And if we can't forget, she asked, taking a step closer. We'll have to, he replied, but she noticed he didn't step back when she approached. Austin, she said softly. That night. Can't happen again, he interrupted, but his voice was hoarse. It can't even be discussed. If anyone finds out, if there's any suspicion. I know, she said. I understand, but pretending it didn't exist is impossible when what? When you look at me like that, she whispered. Austin closed his eyes and stepped back, putting distance between them again. I can't afford to look at you anyway other than professionally. Even if it's killing you inside? She asked. Especially if it's killing me inside, he replied, opening his eyes. Because I've already lost everything once because of feelings I couldn't control, and I won't let that happen again. Danielle nodded slowly, finally understanding the depth of his fear. It wasn't just about company policy or professionalism. It was about survival. Then we'll pretend, she said finally. We'll pretend we're just CEO and employee. We'll pretend that night never happened. We'll pretend we don't feel this connection every time we're in the same room. It's not pretending, Austin said, returning to behind his desk. It's reality. It's the only reality we can allow ourselves. You're right, Danielle said, heading for the door. It's the only reality we can have. When she reached the door, Austin called her once more. Danielle? Yes? For what it's worth. That night was perfect for me too. She turned and saw him looking out the window again, his back rigid with tension. Good night, Mr. Hawthorne, she said softly, and left the office. As she walked back to her desk, Danielle tried to convince herself she could do this. She could work every day with the man who had awakened something in her soul she didn't even know existed. She could pretend that kiss under the moonlight had been just a moment of temporary madness. But when she got home that night and saw the Monterey napkin still tucked in her wallet, that little drawing of two waves meeting, she knew she was lying to herself. Some connections were too strong to simply be forgotten, no matter how many corporate policies existed to prevent them. And while Austin remained in his office until very late that night, looking at the city lights and trying to convince himself he had done the right thing, part of him knew he was fighting a battle he might have already lost the moment he saw her walking on that beach in Monterey. 6 weeks had passed since the conversation in Austin's office, and Danielle had become a master at maintaining professional composure. She arrived early, left late, and dedicated herself to work with an intensity that impressed even Jennifer. But it was during the inevitable meetings with Austin that she truly tested her limits of self-control. The first time they worked together on a project was during the preparation for launching the chain's new hotel in Miami. Danielle had been assigned to lead the customer experience strategy, while Austin supervised the entire project. Expectations for Miami are sky high, Austin said during the initial meeting, his voice purely professional as he reviewed the documents spread across the conference table. This isn't just another hotel, it's our entry into the southern market, and we need it to be perfect. Danielle studied the floor plans and technical specifications, her mind already forming ideas. Miami's audience is different, she said, pointing to the demographic data. They expect glamour, but also authenticity. We can't just replicate what works in Chicago or New York. Austin looked up from the papers, and for a moment she saw not the cautious CEO, but the man passionate about hospitality she had met in Monterey. "Continue," he said. "We need a concierge who's more like a cultural curator," Danielle explained, leaning over the table. "Someone who knows Miami's secrets that even locals don't know. And the lobby needs to be a sensory experience, not just visual, but olfactory and auditory too." "You're thinking specific ambient music?" Austin asked, and she could see the gears turning in his mind. "Not ambient music," she corrected, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Local music. Partnerships with emerging Miami artists. The hotel becomes not just a place to stay, but a cultural destination." Austin leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in weeks, she saw a genuine smile on his face. "That's brilliant. How did you think of that?" "Because you taught me that hospitality is about creating memories," she replied without thinking, and then stopped, realizing she had referred to their conversation in Monterey. Austin's smile disappeared momentarily, replaced by something more complex. Recognition, longing, and then the familiar professional mask. "It's a solid approach," he said, returning to the documents. "Let's explore this." In the following weeks, they worked together with a synchronicity that was both thrilling and torturous. Danielle discovered that Austin wasn't just a visionary CEO. He understood every aspect of the hotel experience with a depth that impressed her. When she suggested changes to the spa layout, he immediately understood how it would affect customer flow. When he proposed alterations to the restaurant, she could anticipate the implications for room service. "You have a natural talent for this," Austin said during a particularly productive planning session. They had spent 3 hours refining the rooftop bar concept, and the table was covered with sketches, fabric samples, and reference photos. "I learned from the best," Danielle replied, organizing the materials. "Your insights on experiential design are—" "No," Austin interrupted, standing and walking to the window. "This isn't me teaching you. This is you having a vision I never would have had alone." There was something in his voice that made her stop organizing the papers and look at him. He was watching the city's movement below, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Austin," she said softly, "do you know how many hospitality consultants I've hired in the last 5 years?" he asked without turning around. "Dozens, all with impressive credentials, brilliant portfolios, stellar recommendations. And none of them managed to do what you've done in 6 weeks," he said, finally turning to face her. "None of them understood the soul of what we're trying to create." Danielle felt her heart race. You see things others don't see," he continued, taking a few steps toward the table. "Like how check-in should be a celebration, not a bureaucratic transaction. How the concierge needs to be a storyteller, not just an information provider. How every detail, from the texture of the towels to the sound of the elevators, contributes to a larger narrative." They were now just a few steps apart, and Danielle could see something dangerous shining in his eyes. Professional admiration that was dangerously close to transforming into something more. "This is dangerous," she said quietly. "What? You looking at me like that?" she admitted. Like you're perfect for this job," he finished. "Because you are." "Just for the job?" she asked, knowing she was stepping into forbidden territory but unable to stop herself. Austin closed his eyes for a moment. "Danielle, I know," she said quickly. "Sorry. That was inappropriate." "It wasn't inappropriate," he said, opening his eyes. "It was honest, and honesty is one of the things I most admire about you." Austin's phone rang, breaking the moment. He answered with a curt, "Hawthorne," and Danielle took advantage of the interruption to compose herself. "Yes, you can send them up," Austin said into the phone. "Thank you." "More materials?" Danielle asked, grateful for the change of subject. "Actually, it's occupancy numbers from our competitors in Miami," Austin said, returning to purely professional mode. "I thought it would be useful for our pricing strategy." For the next 40 minutes, they analyzed market data, occupancy trends, and pricing strategies. It was technical and detailed work, but Danielle noticed how Austin frequently asked for her opinion on aspects that clearly weren't in her area of expertise. "Why are you asking me about financial projections?" she finally asked. "I'm in customer experience, not finance." Austin paused, a spreadsheet in his hand. Because you ask questions I don't think to ask, he admitted. Like when you asked if our premium weekend prices would take into account local families who want to use our amenities. I was only thinking about tourists. And that made you rethink the entire strategy, Danielle realized. Completely, he confirmed. Now we're offering packages for Miami residents on weekends, which not only increases our revenue, but also creates connections with the local community. Danielle smiled. That's beautiful. The hotel becomes part of the city's fabric, not just a place for visitors. Exactly, Austin said, and she could see genuine passion in his eyes. That's why I need your perspective on everything, not just the obvious customer experience aspects. Does that mean I'm more than just a customer experience manager? She asked, half joking. It means you're essential, he said, and there was weight in that word that went beyond professional. They worked late that night, and when they finally stopped, they had created something neither could have developed alone. The concept for the Miami Hotel had evolved from a standard expansion project into a revolutionary vision of urban hospitality. I think we're done for today, Austin said, stretching in his chair. It was almost 10 o'clock, and the building was practically empty. Agreed, Danielle said, saving the last document on her laptop. I think we created something special here. We did, Austin agreed, and there was something in the way he said, we, that made her heart race. As she packed up her materials, Austin remained seated, watching her. Danielle? Yes? Thank you, he said simply. For what? For reminding me why I love this business, he replied. For showing me there's still innovation to be made, stories to be told. Danielle stopped packing papers and looked at him. Austin, you built one of the most respected hotel chains in the country. Why are you talking like you'd lost your passion? He was silent for a long moment. Because maybe I had, he finally admitted. In recent years, it became more about protecting what I built than about creating something new. And now? Now I feel like I'm creating again, he said, standing up. And it's invigorating. They walked together to the elevator, a comfortable silence between them. But when the doors opened, Austin hesitated. Danielle, I need you to know something. What? Working with you is both the best and worst thing that's ever happened to me professionally. Why? Because you make me want to break all the rules I created to protect myself, he said quietly, entering the elevator. As they descended in silence, Danielle knew exactly what he meant. Because working with Austin was like discovering a part of herself she didn't even know existed. The part that could create, innovate, and dream on a grand scale. And the part that was falling more deeply in love with each meeting, each project, each moment of intellectual connection that brought them closer to the emotional precipice they were both desperately trying to avoid. When they separated in the parking garage, Danielle knew they had crossed an invisible line that night. Not a physical or even verbal line, but a line of intellectual and emotional intimacy that made it impossible to pretend they were just CEO and employee. They were partners. They were a perfect team, and that, she realized while driving home, was much more dangerous than the physical attraction they had felt that night in Monterey, because now it wasn't just their hearts that were connected, it was their minds, their ambitions, their dreams for the future. And that made the company policy not just an obstacle, but a tragedy. Raymond Martinez had worked in the Hawthorne Resorts building for 17 years, since before Austin Hawthorne had even dreamed of founding the company. At 62, with graying hair and brown eyes that seemed to see through people, Raymond had a simple philosophy about life. Some things were too important to be left to chance, and what he was observing between the CEO and the new customer experience manager definitely fit into that category. Raymond arrived at work every day at 5 in the morning, 2 hours before the first administrative employee. That's when he did his best observing, in the quiet moments when people thought no one was watching. And in the last 8 weeks, he had seen a lot. He had seen Austin Hawthorne, a man who normally left the office promptly at 6 p.m., staying until 10 at night whenever he had meetings with Danielle Morrison. He had seen how Austin would pause in the hallway when he heard her laughter coming from the conference room. He had seen how Danielle would arrive early on the mornings following meeting days with Austin, as if she couldn't sleep. But it was on Thursday morning, while cleaning the windows on the 32nd floor, that Raymond witnessed something that confirmed his suspicions. Austin was in his office talking on the phone with someone about financial projections when Danielle walked past the hallway carrying a stack of presentations. She couldn't see him through the frosted glass, but Austin saw her. Raymond watched as the CEO paused mid-sentence, his eyes following her silhouette until she disappeared from view. "Sorry, could you repeat the question?" Austin said into the phone, clearly distracted. Raymond shook his head, smiling. In 17 years of cleaning offices, he had seen many corporate romances. Some were based on convenience, others on ambition. But what he was observing between Austin and Danielle was different. It was the kind of connection that happened once in a lifetime, and was wasted far too often by people who were afraid to take risks. That afternoon, while emptying trash cans on the 33rd floor, Raymond heard a conversation that made him stop in the hallway. "I don't understand why you're torturing yourself like this," Jennifer was saying to Danielle. They were in the break room, apparently thinking they were alone. "I don't know what you're talking about," Danielle replied, but her voice sounded tired. "Danielle, I've worked in HR for 15 years. I know how to recognize unresolved sexual tension when I see it." Raymond almost dropped the trash can. Jennifer Walsh was usually discretion personified. "Jennifer!" Danielle exclaimed. "What? You two are being obvious. Every time you're in the same room, it's like watching two magnets trying not to attract each other." "It's complicated," Danielle murmured. "It's the company policy," Jennifer said gently. "I know. But Danielle, sometimes I wonder if Austin created that rule to protect himself from his own feelings, not just to protect the company." Raymond had to move away when he heard footsteps approaching, but that conversation confirmed what he already suspected. There was more to this story than just professional attraction. On Friday morning, Raymond decided it was time for a little intervention. Austin was alone in his office, reviewing contracts, when Raymond knocked on the door. "Come in," Austin said without looking up. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," Raymond said, pushing his cleaning cart into the room. "Sorry to interrupt." "No problem, Raymond," Austin replied, finally looking up. "How are you doing?" It was one of the things Raymond most admired about Austin. He always treated all employees with genuine respect, from executives to the cleaning staff. "I'm well, thank you," Raymond said, beginning to clean the windows. "Mr. Hawthorne, may I ask you a personal question?" Austin paused, clearly surprised. In 17 years, Raymond rarely initiated conversations beyond polite greetings. "Sure, Raymond." "Have you ever been in love?" Raymond asked casually, wiping the window with his cloth. Austin choked on his coffee. "Excuse me?" "Really in love," Raymond continued. "The kind of love that makes you forget to eat, lose sleep, question every decision you've ever made in your life?" "Raymond, that's quite personal," Austin said, clearly uncomfortable. "Sorry, sir. It's just that I've worked here a long time, and I've seen many things. Relationships that flourished, others that withered because people were afraid to take risks." Austin leaned back in his chair, studying Raymond's face. "Where are you going with this?" "Nowhere specific," Raymond said, moving to the next window. "It's just that, well, my wife always used to say that life is too short to waste true love because of rules made by people who are afraid to live." "Your wife?" Austin asked, genuinely interested now. 42 years of marriage," Raymond said proudly. "She died 3 years ago, but I still feel like she's here with me every day." "I'm sorry for your loss," Austin said sincerely. "Thank you, sir. But I'll tell you something. If I had let rules and fears keep me from being with her, I would have missed out on the best 42 years of my life." Austin was silent for a long moment. "Raymond, are you trying to give me relationship advice?" Raymond smiled. "I'm just sharing the wisdom of an old man who's seen too many wasted opportunities." "And what have you seen that concerns you?" Austin asked, and there was something vulnerable in his voice. "I've seen two brilliant young people who clearly care about each other, but are so scared of their own rules that they're missing out on something precious." Austin stood and walked to the window Raymond had just cleaned. "Some rules exist for good reasons, Raymond." "I completely agree," Raymond said. "But sometimes the rules we create to protect ourselves end up being the very things that keep us from living." "It's more complicated than that," Austin murmured. "Love always is," Raymond agreed, "but complicated doesn't mean impossible. It means it's worth fighting for." That afternoon, Raymond decided to test his theory. He had noticed that Austin always got coffee from the 32nd floor break room at 3:30, while Danielle usually did the same at 3:45. A 15-minute difference that seemed too convenient to be coincidence. At 3:20, Raymond strategically began cleaning the coffee machine, placing a temporary out-of-order sign on it. At 3:30, Austin appeared, as always. "Problems with the machine?" Austin asked, seeing Raymond pretending to examine the equipment. "Oh yes, sir," Raymond said. "Looks like it'll take about 20 minutes to fix. Maybe you'd like to try the break room on the 33rd floor?" Austin sighed. "All right, thanks, Raymond." Exactly 15 minutes later, Danielle appeared. "Hi, Raymond," she said with a smile. "Is the machine broken?" "Unfortunately, yes, miss," Raymond replied. "But I think I've fixed it now. Would you like me to make you some coffee?" "That would be great, thanks." While Raymond prepared the coffee with deliberate slowness, he heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Perfect. Austin appeared at the break room entrance, clearly surprised to see Danielle there. "Oh," he said. "Hi." "Hi," Danielle replied, a slight blush rising to her cheeks. "Mr. Hawthorne," Raymond exclaimed, as if it were a coincidence. "The machine here was working all along. What luck." Austin looked at him suspiciously, but Danielle seemed to believe the coincidence. "Well, since we're both here," Austin said hesitantly, "maybe we could quickly discuss the budget for the Miami spa amenities." "Sure," Danielle agreed. Raymond finished preparing the coffees and discreetly withdrew, but not before hearing the beginning of a conversation that quickly evolved from business to something more personal. "You look tired," Austin was saying. "I'm fine," Danielle replied. "Just haven't been sleeping very well lately." "Any specific reason?" There was a pause, and Raymond imagined the internal war Danielle was fighting. "Working here has been intense," she said finally. "In a good way?" "In the best way," she admitted, "and in the most complicated way too." Raymond smiled as he walked away. It was exactly the kind of honest conversation they needed to have. That evening, while making his final rounds, Raymond found a note left on his desk in the basement. "Raymond, thank you for this morning's conversation. You gave me a lot to think about. A.H." The following Monday, Raymond noticed subtle changes. Austin and Danielle still maintained professional distance, but there was something different in the way they looked at each other during meetings, a softness that hadn't been there before. "Progress," Raymond murmured to himself while organizing his cleaning supplies. Because if there was one thing that 17 years of silent observation had taught him, it was that true love always found a way. Sometimes it just needed a little push in the right direction. And Raymond Martinez was more than willing to give as many pushes as necessary to ensure that two special people didn't waste a once-in-a-lifetime chance at happiness because of silly rules and unnecessary fears. After all, as his late wife used to say, love doesn't ask about corporate policies before knocking on the door. And this door was about to be opened, whether they wanted it or not. Monday arrived with a surprise that Danielle definitely wasn't expecting. She was reviewing customer satisfaction reports when Jennifer appeared at her desk with a mysterious smile. "Danielle, we have a new financial consultant working on the Miami project," Jennifer announced. "Austin asked for you to walk him through the customer experience budget details." "Of course," Danielle replied, saving the document she was working on. "When does he arrive?" "Actually, he's already here," Jennifer said, gesturing to someone behind her. "Danielle Morrison, this is Sebastian Torres, our financial consultant who specializes in hotel projects." Danielle looked up and felt her heart give a small jump, not from romantic attraction, but from genuine surprise. Sebastian Torres was objectively attractive, tall with perfectly styled dark hair, warm brown eyes, and a smile that radiated confidence without arrogance. He wore an impeccably tailored grey suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than many people's monthly salary. "Miss Morrison," Sebastian said, extending his hand with a charming smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard impressive things about your work on the Miami project." "Mr. Torres," Danielle replied, shaking his hand. "Welcome to the team." "Please call me Sebastian," he said, and there was something in his voice, a slight accent she couldn't identify, that was genuinely charming. "And if it's not too bold, may I call you Danielle?" "Of course," she agreed, noticing how Jennifer watched the interaction with obvious interest. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted," Jennifer said. "Sebastian, Danielle is our customer experience specialist. If you have questions about how costs translate into guest value, she's the right person." After Jennifer walked away, Sebastian sat in the chair next to Danielle's desk. "So," he said, opening his briefcase and pulling out an elegant tablet, "tell me about your vision for Miami. I'm especially interested in how you justify higher costs for amenities that, in theory, could be considered unnecessary luxuries by traditional accountants." Danielle smiled. She liked it when people questioned her decisions intelligently. "Unnecessary luxuries," she repeated, opening her own laptop. "Interesting perspective. Tell me, Sebastian, what's your personal experience with luxury hotels?" "Extensive," he replied. "I travel about 200 days a year for work. I've stayed at some of the best hotels in the world." "Perfect," Danielle said. "Then you understand that when someone pays $500 a night, they're not just paying for a room. They're paying for an experience," Sebastian finished. "Touché. Continue." For the next 40 minutes, Danielle explained her experiential design philosophy, how each seemingly expensive element contributed to a larger narrative that justified premium pricing. Sebastian asked intelligent questions, offered insights based on market data, and clearly understood the hospitality industry in a way that went beyond numbers on spreadsheets. "Impressive," he said, when she finished showing the lobby mock-ups. "You're not just a customer experience manager. You're an architect of emotions." Danielle laughed. "That's the first time anyone's called me that. Well, it's the first time I've worked with someone who can make me understand why spending $20,000 on a specific lobby fountain is an investment, not an expense." It was at that moment that Danielle noticed Austin standing at the entrance to the work area, watching them. She didn't know how long he'd been there, but there was something in his expression she couldn't decipher. "Sebastian," Austin said, approaching. His voice was professional, but Danielle detected a subtle coldness. "How are things going?" "Excellently," Sebastian replied, standing to greet Austin. "Danielle is exceptional. She managed to convince me that local art in the lobby isn't just decoration, but a strategic branding element." "Danielle has unique talents," Austin said, and there was something in the way he said it that made Danielle's stomach do a small flip. "I was thinking," Sebastian continued, apparently oblivious to the waves of tension, "maybe we could continue our discussion over lunch. There are some F&B budget aspects I'd like to explore." Danielle looked between Sebastian and Austin, feeling like she was navigating treacherous waters. What a great idea," Austin said before she could respond. "Danielle, why don't you show Sebastian that Italian restaurant you were talking about? What was the name again?" Danielle looked at him, confused. She had never mentioned any Italian restaurant to Austin. "Il Posto," she improvised quickly. "Yes, it's very good for business discussions." "Perfect," Sebastian said, putting away his tablet. "How about in an hour?" "Perfect," Austin repeated, but his tone suggested it was anything but perfect. An hour later, Danielle found herself sitting across from Sebastian at Il Posto, a cozy Italian restaurant she had chosen at the last minute. To her surprise, the conversation flowed naturally. Sebastian was intelligent, well-traveled, and had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh. "So," Sebastian said, twirling some linguine on his fork, "how did a clearly talented woman like you end up in Chicago? You don't seem like you're from the Midwest." "California originally," Danielle replied. "But Chicago was always the dream, the city's energy, the opportunities, and a dream job I couldn't refuse." "Hawthorne Resorts really is a special place," Sebastian agreed. "Austin has built something impressive, though he seems to be intense." Danielle almost choked on her wine. "Intense?" "Reserved, controlled, the kind of man who probably never did an impulsive thing in his life." If Sebastian only knew, Danielle thought, about a certain night in Monterey Bay. "He's a good boss," she said diplomatically. "I'm sure he is," Sebastian said. "But tell me, Danielle, when was the last time you did something completely for fun? No professional agenda, no career goals?" The question caught her off guard. Why do you ask?" "Because you seem like someone who dedicates herself so much to work that she forgets to live," he said gently. "And that would be a tragedy." After lunch, as they walked back to the office, Sebastian stopped in front of the building. "Danielle, may I be direct?" "Of course. I would very much like to take you to dinner. Not work-related, not about budgets or marketing strategies. Just two interesting adults getting to know each other better." Danielle felt her heart race, but not for the reason Sebastian probably expected. It was because automatically her first reaction was to think of Austin, how he would react, what it would mean for the already complicated dynamic between them. "Sebastian, You don't need to answer now," he said quickly, "but think about it. You deserve to be courted by someone who can appreciate you without corporate complications." Corporate complications. If he only knew. "I'll think about it," she said finally. When they returned to the office, Danielle went straight to the bathroom to compose herself. While touching up her lipstick, her phone vibrated with a message. It was from Austin. "Need to see you in my office. Now." Danielle's stomach dropped. There was something in the tone of the message, even via text, that worried her. She knocked on his office door 5 minutes later. "Come in," came the dry response. Austin was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. He didn't turn when she entered. "You called for me?" she said, closing the door. "How was lunch?" he asked, still with his back to her. "Productive," she replied carefully. "Sebastian has interesting insights about the cost structure." "I'm sure he does," Austin said, and there was something dangerous in his voice. "Austin, is everything okay?" Finally, he turned, and Danielle was shocked by the intensity in his eyes. There was something wild there, something she had never seen before. "He asked you out," Austin said. "It wasn't a question." "How did you—" "I saw you talking in front of the building," he admitted. The body language was pretty obvious. Danielle felt a spark of anger. "So what if he did?" "So what?" Austin repeated, taking a step toward her. "Danielle, don't you see what's happening here?" "I see a professional consultant being polite," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "You see a man who wants to take you away from me," Austin said, and then stopped abruptly, realizing what he had just revealed. The silence that followed was deafening. "Take me away from you," Danielle repeated quietly. "Austin, I'm not yours, aren't you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Then why does every time I imagine you going out with him, I feel like someone is ripping my heart out of my chest?" Danielle felt her heart stop. "Austin, you're free to go out with whoever you want," he continued, running his hand through his hair in the familiar gesture of frustration. "You should go out with him. He can give you everything. Dinner at expensive restaurants, travel, a life without corporate complications." "And what can you give me?" she asked, taking a step toward him. Austin looked at her, as if she had just asked the most painful question in the world. "Nothing," he said finally. "Absolutely nothing but complications, company policies, and the certainty that any relationship between us would destroy everything I've worked for." "That's what your head is saying," Danielle said softly. "What is your heart saying?" Austin closed his eyes. "My heart is saying that you're the only person who makes sense in my world. That working with you is the only time I feel truly alive. That the idea of you in another man's arms is driving me crazy." When he opened his eyes, Danielle could see raw vulnerability there. "But my heart has disappointed me before," he said, "and I can't afford to let it decide again." "So you'd rather see me with Sebastian?" she asked. "I'd rather see you happy," he said, "even if that means it's not with me." Danielle took another step toward him, now close enough to touch his face if she wanted to. "What if I told you I could only be happy with you?" "Then I'd say you're being reckless," he replied, but his voice was failing. "What if I told you I don't care about the rules?" "Then I'd say you should care," he whispered, "because I care enough for both of us." But even as he said this, his eyes fell to her lips, and Danielle could see the internal war he was fighting. "Austin," she said softly. "Leave," he said abruptly, backing away. "Please, just leave before I do something we'll both regret." Danielle studied him for a long moment, seeing the pain and desire fighting in his expression. "For the record," she said finally, "Sebastian may be charming, intelligent, and free of complications, but he's not you." And with that, she left the office, leaving Austin alone with his demons and the growing certainty that his willpower was reaching its limit. Because seeing her potentially in another man's arms had awakened something primal in him, something that all the corporate policies in the world couldn't control much longer. 3 days had passed since the tense conversation in Austin's office, and Danielle felt like she was walking an emotional tightrope. Sebastian had sent flowers, an elegant arrangement of white peonies, with a card that simply said, "Thinking about our conversation. S." The flowers were now on her desk, attracting curious glances from colleagues and whispered comments she pretended not to hear. Austin, on the other hand, had become a ghost. He had cancelled 2 meetings they had scheduled, delegated the Miami budget review to Jennifer, and when their paths inevitably crossed in the hallways, he offered only a polite nod before heading in the opposite direction. On Wednesday night, while Danielle was working late reviewing design proposals for the Miami spa, her phone buzzed with a message from Sebastian. "Dinner tomorrow? I know a perfect place to talk about art, and maybe about us." She stared at the message for a long time, the cursor blinking on the screen. Sebastian was genuinely an interesting man. He was attractive, successful, and, most importantly, available. There were no corporate policies complicating the situation, no painful stories of relationships that destroyed companies. It was the sensible choice. But as she typed a response, the floor door opened and she heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Austin. It was almost 9 at night. What was he doing there so late? "Danielle?" His voice echoed through the empty space. "Are you still here?" "At my desk," she replied, quickly putting her phone aside. Austin appeared at the entrance to her work area, looking surprised to see her. He had his tie loosened, shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was a vulnerability in his disheveled appearance that made her heart race. "Why are you working so late?" he asked, slowly approaching. "Could ask you the same thing," she replied. "I thought you were avoiding this floor." Austin stopped beside her desk, noticing the flowers. Something darkened in his eyes. "He doesn't give up easily," he observed. "He's a determined man," Danielle said, watching his reaction carefully. "And you? Are you going to accept his invitation?" The question came out harsher than he probably intended. Danielle could see his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, a sign of nervous tension she was learning to recognize. "Maybe," she said. "He's kind." "Kind," Austin repeated, as if the word were bitter on his tongue. "And there are no complications," Danielle added, testing the limits of his patience. Austin let out a dry laugh. "No complications, of course." "Austin, what are you doing here?" she asked, standing up from her chair. "Because if you came to give me your blessing to go out with Sebastian, I can save you the time. I don't need your permission." "I know you don't," he said, taking a step closer. "I know you're free to do whatever you want. Go out with whoever you want. Fall in love with whoever you want." "Then why are you here?" Austin ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture, indicating he was struggling with something internally. "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he finally admitted. "Because for 3 days I've been trying to convince myself it would be better if you were with him, and I couldn't go 5 minutes without hating myself for it." Danielle felt her heart stop. "Austin." "No," he interrupted, raising his hand. "Let me finish. Because if I don't say this now, I'm going to explode." He began pacing in circles like a caged animal. "You want to know why I created that policy about relationships?" he asked, stopping abruptly to face her. "It wasn't just because of Morrison and Associates. It was because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of feeling something so strong it would make me forget everything else," he said, his voice becoming more intense. "Scared of finding someone who was so perfect for me that I would risk everything, including my sanity, to be with her." The words hung in the air between them, charged with years of fear and denial. "And then you showed up," Austin continued, taking a step toward her. "That night in Monterey, you showed up in that coral dress with that smile, and I knew. I knew the moment you said you didn't know me, but it felt like we'd lived that conversation before." Danielle could feel tears forming in her eyes. "Austin, stop." "I can't stop," he said, now close enough to touch her face. "Because you did something no one else managed to do in 5 years. You made me want to break every rule I created to protect myself." "That scares you," she observed. "It terrifies me," he admitted. "Because it's not just attraction, Danielle. It's not just physical chemistry or professional compatibility. It's everything." "What are you saying?" Austin looked into her eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw him completely disarmed. "I'm saying I'm hopelessly in love with you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm saying I wake up thinking about you, spend all day making up excuses to be near you, and go to sleep imagining what it would be like if things were different." Danielle felt a tear roll down her face. "Austin, I'm saying that when I saw you with Sebastian, I felt jealous in a way I never thought possible. Primitive, irrational jealousy that made me want to mark territory like some kind of wild animal." He laughed bitterly. "And then I realized how ridiculous that was, because you're not mine. You can't be mine, and he can give you everything I can't." "Like what?" Danielle asked, her voice a whisper. "Simplicity," Austin replied. "A life without suspicious looks, without whispers in the hallways, without the constant pressure of hiding how I feel about you." "What if I don't want simplicity?" she asked, taking a step closer. "Then you're braver than I am," he said. "Or maybe you're braver than you think." Austin looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail of her face. "Danielle, if I kiss you now, if I admit out loud that I want to be with you more than I want to protect my company, there's no going back. Maybe there shouldn't be any going back," she whispered. "The consequences." "Damn the consequences," Danielle said, surprising them both with the intensity of her voice. "Austin, do you think I don't feel the same thing? Do you think I don't wake up thinking about you too? Danielle, do you think I don't get jealous when your secretary talks about meetings with important ladies who come to visit you? Do you think it's easy for me to pretend that night in Monterey didn't change everything?" Austin closed his eyes. "It shouldn't be like this." "But it is," she said, reaching for his face and forcing him to look at her. "This is how it is. And you can fight against it until you're exhausted. Or you can accept that some things are bigger than our rules and fears. If we're together, I could lose everything," he whispered. "And if we're not together, you'll definitely lose everything that matters," she replied. Austin looked into her eyes, and Danielle could see the exact moment his resolve finally broke. "I can't pretend anymore," he admitted. "I can't be in the same building as you anymore and pretend I'm just your boss. I can't see other men courting you anymore and not want to scream to the whole world that you're mine." "Then don't pretend anymore," Danielle whispered. "Danielle Morrison," Austin said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I am utterly and hopelessly in love with you. And if you'll have me, with all the complications and consequences that brings, I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." In response, Danielle moved closer and kissed him, pouring years of longing, weeks of tension, and a lifetime of love that had been waiting to be acknowledged. When they finally separated, both were breathless. "This changes everything," Austin whispered against her forehead. "It was supposed to," Danielle replied. "Some things need to change." "And Sebastian?" "I'm sending the flowers back with a polite note," she said, "because no matter how kind or uncomplicated he is, he's not you. And you're the only person I want." Austin held her against him, as if she might disappear if he let her go. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you in a way that scares me and completes me at the same time." "I love you too," she replied, "and we'll figure out together how to make this work. Because some things were worth risking everything for, and the love they shared was definitely one of them." The morning after the confession, Danielle arrived at the office with a mixture of euphoria and nervousness coursing through her veins. The previous night had changed everything. The words Austin had said, the kiss that sealed their feelings, the silent promise that they would find a way to make it work. But now, in the cold light of the corporate morning, the reality of complications was beginning to manifest. How would they behave in meetings? How would they maintain the necessary professionalism when all she wanted was to touch him, kiss him, whisper words of love in his ear? Austin arrived an hour after her, as always, but this time when he passed by her desk, their eyes met for a moment charged with meaning. He didn't stop, didn't say anything, but the small smile that curved his lips was enough to make her heart race. Around 10 in the morning, Jennifer appeared with a stack of documents. "Danielle, I need you to review these vendor contracts for Miami," she said. "And Austin wants you two to go over the final budget details together. He said you can use the archive room on the 31st floor. It's more private for sensitive financial discussions." Danielle nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral, but her heart was already beating faster. They would be alone. for the first time since last night's confession. 15 minutes later, she was in the archive room, a small, efficient space at the end of the hallway, surrounded by tall shelves filled with meticulously organized documents. Austin was already there, standing near a small table, contracts spread out in front of him. "Hi," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "Hi," he replied, and there was a new shyness in his voice that she found adorable. They worked in silence for a few minutes, reviewing numbers and contract clauses, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every time their arms accidentally touched while pointing to something on paper, it was like a small electric shock. "Austin," Danielle finally said, unable to stand the tension anymore. "Yes? About last night. Are you having second thoughts?" he asked quickly, concern evident in his eyes. "Not at all," she replied, and saw relief spread across his face. "But I'm nervous about how we're going to handle this at work." Austin moved closer to her, his hand gently reaching for her face. "I'm nervous too, but I don't regret anything I said. Every word was true." "I know," she whispered. Before she could finish the sentence, they heard a distinctive click. Austin quickly turned to the door and tried the handle. "Nothing. This can't be happening," he murmured, trying again. "What's wrong?" Danielle asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The door is locked," Austin said, pressing his shoulder against it. "These old locks sometimes get stuck." Danielle approached and tried the handle too. The door was definitely locked. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, but then a suspicion began to form in her mind. "Austin, don't you think—" "Raymond," Austin said at the same time, and they both looked at each other. "He wouldn't do that," Danielle said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You've known Raymond for 2 weeks," Austin replied dryly. "I've known him for 5 years. He absolutely would do that." Austin grabbed his phone and tried calling reception. No signal. "These rooms have thick walls to protect confidential documents," he explained. "Terrible cell reception." Danielle looked around the small space, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with a small window too high to reach and no obvious means of escape. "So we're trapped," she said. "Apparently," Austin replied, but there was something in his voice that suggested he wasn't completely uncomfortable with the situation. "How long do you think—" "Maintenance staff does rounds every 2 hours, Austin said, looking at his watch. "If we're lucky, someone finds us in an hour. And if we're not lucky, 2.5 hours. They sat on the floor, leaning against opposite shelves, looking at each other across the small space. "So," Danielle said, trying to break the tension, "this is awkward." Austin laughed, a genuine sound she hadn't heard in weeks. "Awkward isn't the word I'd use." "What word would you use?" He looked at her intensely. "Fate." "Fate?" she repeated, feeling her heart race. "Danielle, how many times in 5 years do you think someone got locked in this room?" Austin asked. "I wouldn't know." "Never," he replied. "This is the first time, and it happens exactly the day after we finally admit our feelings to each other." Danielle considered this. "So you think Raymond—" "I think Raymond decided he'd waited long enough for us to figure it out on our own," Austin said, standing up and moving closer to her. "That's brilliant," Austin completed, sitting down next to her on the floor. "Frustrating, manipulative, but brilliant." Now that he was close, Danielle could feel the warmth of his body, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something that was purely Austin. His proximity was intoxicating. "Austin," she whispered. "Yes? Are we really doing this? Are we really risking everything for love?" he finished, his hand finding hers. "Yes, we are. What if it goes wrong? What if it goes right?" he counter-asked, turning to face her completely. "Danielle, I spent 5 years building walls around my heart, 5 years convincing myself that safety was more important than happiness, and then you showed up and destroyed all those walls with a smile. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you built," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "You don't understand," Austin said, his hands now holding her face. "Without you, everything I built means nothing. It's just a successful company, run by a lonely man who's afraid to live. Austin, I love you," he said, his words echoing in the small room. "I love you more than I fear the consequences. I love you more than I value my reputation. I love you more than any corporate policy I might have created. Even knowing it could complicate everything?" "Especially knowing that," he replied, because you're worth any complication." And then he kissed her. It wasn't like the hesitant kiss from the night before. This was a kiss of complete surrender, of two hearts that finally stopped fighting against the inevitable. His hands tangled in her hair, hers clutched at his shirt. And for a moment the entire world narrowed down to that small space and the perfection of finally being united. When they separated, both were breathless. "This," Austin whispered against her lips, "is what should have happened in that first meeting." Danielle laughed through her tears. "That would have been quite inappropriate." "It would have been honest," he corrected. They stayed intertwined on the archive room floor, talking quietly about dreams, fears, and the future they could now imagine together. Austin told her about the lonely years after the Morrison and Associates disaster, how he had convinced himself that emotional isolation was the price of success. Danielle spoke about past superficial relationships, about how she had never felt such a deep connection with anyone. "You know what scares me most?" Austin said, playing with her fingers. "What?" "That this feels too easy. That being with you is so natural that I'll forget why I was so afraid." "Maybe it was supposed to be easy," Danielle suggested. "Maybe everything else was what was being difficult." It was at that moment they heard footsteps in the hallway. "Someone's coming," Austin whispered, and they both stood up quickly, trying to compose themselves. "Mr. Hawthorne." "Miss Morrison," came Raymond's familiar voice. "Are you in there?" "Raymond," Austin called. "The door is locked." "Oh, how strange," Raymond replied, and Danielle was sure she could hear a smile in his voice. "Let me check that." They heard the sound of keys, and a few moments later, the door opened. Raymond stood outside, an innocent smile on his face. "How odd," he said. "That lock has never given trouble before." Austin and Raymond looked at each other for a long moment, a silent conversation passing between them. "Thank you, Raymond," Austin said finally. "Always at your service," Raymond replied. "I hope you managed to resolve all the contractual issues." "We resolved several important issues," Danielle said, trying not to smile. "Excellent," Raymond said, starting to walk away. "And Mr. Hawthorne? That policy we discussed a few weeks ago? Perhaps it's time for a review." After Raymond left, Austin and Danielle looked at each other. "He definitely planned this," Danielle said. "Definitely," Austin agreed. "And I need to thank him." "Why?" "Because," Austin said, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers, "he gave us what we needed. Time to stop running from each other and start running toward our future." "And what future will that be?" she asked. "A future where I rewrite all the rules," Austin replied. "Starting now." And as they left the archive room hand in hand, they both knew there was no going back. They had surrendered to love, and now it was time to discover exactly what that meant for their lives, their careers, and the future they would build together. The first step would be Austin doing exactly what he promised, rewriting the rules. 3 months had passed since that transformative day in the archive room, and Austin Hawthorne was about to do something he never imagined possible, completely rewrite the policy that had governed his company and his life for so many years. The boardroom was silent as the 7 members of Hawthorne Resort's administrative board settled into their leather chairs. Austin stood at the head of the table, a presentation prepared on his laptop, but his slightly trembling hands revealed his nervousness. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Austin began, adjusting his tie. "I know you all have tight schedules, but I need to discuss a fundamental change in company policy." Margaret Chen, the most senior director, raised an eyebrow. "Fundamental change?" "Austin, in 5 years, you've never suggested alterations to our basic policies." "That's exactly why I need to do this now," Austin replied, clicking to the first slide of his presentation. "Because sometimes to grow, we need to question even our deepest convictions." The slide showed productivity data from the last 3 months, numbers that were impressive even by Hawthorne Resort standards. "As you can see," Austin continued, "our performance indicators have reached historic highs. The Miami project is 15% above projections. Customer satisfaction has risen to 97%. Our revenue per available room has exceeded the competition by 23%. James Morrison, no relation to Danielle, as Austin had discovered with relief, adjusted his glasses. Those are excellent numbers, Austin, but what's the connection to policy changes? Austin took a deep breath. This was it. The connection is that this exceptional performance coincides directly with a professional partnership that has the potential to be more than professional. The silence in the room was instant and absolute. Austin, Margaret said carefully, are you talking about policy 001? I am, Austin confirmed, his voice gaining strength. I'm proposing that we completely revise our policy on relationships between employees. The policy you created yourself, reminded David Park, the CFO. The policy you said was non-negotiable. The policy I created out of fear, Austin admitted, surprising everyone with his honesty. Fear based on a past experience that made me believe love and professional success were mutually exclusive. He moved to the next slide, which showed a detailed analysis of the Miami project results. But the last few months have proven me wrong. When two genuinely compatible professionals work together, whether that compatibility is purely professional or something deeper, the results can be extraordinary. Austin, Margaret said gently, we know you're referring to Danielle Morrison. Austin felt his heart stop. You know, James laughed. Austin, do you think a CEO can be in love without the board noticing? The way you look at her during presentations, how your voice changes when you talk about her work, how you smile when you mention her name. Not to mention, added Sarah Kim, the marketing director, that in the last 3 months you've been happier and more creative than in all the time we've known you. Austin sank heavily into his chair. So you all know. We know, Margaret confirmed, and we were wondering when you'd have the courage to admit it to yourself. You're not worried? Austin asked, genuinely surprised. Worried about what? David asked. About the fact that our company is having the best performance in its history. About the fact that our CEO finally seems human. About the fact that Danielle Morrison is clearly one of the most talented professionals we've ever hired. But what if it goes wrong? Austin asked, voicing his deepest fear. What if this hurts the company? Austin, Sarah said, leaning forward, can I ask you a question? Why did you really create Policy 001? Because, no, she interrupted. The real truth, not the official version. Austin was silent for a long moment. Because I was afraid of falling in love again. And now? Now I've fallen in love, he admitted, raw vulnerability in his voice. Completely, hopelessly, and more deeply than I ever thought possible. Margaret smiled. So what's your proposal? Austin returned to the presentation, more confident now. A revised proposal. Relationships between employees are permitted as long as they're disclosed to HR, don't involve direct hierarchical relationships, and both parties agree to maintain professional standards during work hours. And in cases of direct hierarchy, James asked. Organizational adjustments will be made to eliminate conflicts of interest, Austin replied. For example, Danielle would report directly to Jennifer Walsh, not to me. That's sensible, David admitted, and much more realistic than a total prohibition. There's one last thing, Austin said, his voice becoming softer. If you approve this change, I'd like to implement it officially next week, because I have plans for the weekend that, well, that require me not to be violating company policies. The board members looked at each other, smiles forming on their faces. Plans involving jewelry? Sarah asked with a twinkle in her eyes. Austin couldn't hide his smile. Possibly. Motion to approve the revision of Policy 001, Margaret said formally. Seconded, said James. All in favor? 7 hands rose unanimously. Approved, Margaret announced. And Austin, good luck this weekend. On Friday night, Danielle was getting ready to go out when she received a message from Austin. Wear something comfortable but elegant. I'll pick you up at 7. I have a surprise. She chose a navy blue midi dress, coincidentally the same color she'd been wearing the day they met professionally, and comfortable low heels. Her mind raced with possibilities. Austin had been mysterious all week, canceling their usual Wednesday dinner and whispering phone conversations that he'd end quickly when she approached. At 7 o'clock sharp, he rang the doorbell. When she opened the door, she was breathless. Austin was wearing a dark gray suit, impeccably tailored, but it was the expression on his face that made her stop. There was a mixture of nervousness and determination she had never seen before. You look beautiful, he said, kissing her cheek. "You look mysterious," she replied. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise," he said, offering his arm, "but I promise it's worth it." They went up to the rooftop of the Hawthorne Resorts building. Danielle had been there before for corporate events, but never at night and never like this. The space had been completely transformed. Hundreds of fairy lights created a brilliant canopy over the area, transforming the urban rooftop into an enchanted garden. Small tables with candles were scattered throughout the space, each with arrangements of white peonies, the same flowers Sebastian had sent months ago, but now recontextualized. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and the view of Chicago stretched infinitely in all directions. "Austin," Danielle whispered, "It's a small celebration," he said, guiding her to the center of the space, "to celebrate some important changes." "Changes? To start with," Austin said, stopping near a table decorated with photographs. Photos of them working together, candids taken by Raymond without their knowledge, images from the Miami project. Policy 001 was officially revised today. Danielle felt her heart stop. "What does that mean?" "It means," Austin said, taking her hands, "that I can officially be in love with the most incredible woman I've ever met, without violating any company rules." "Austin," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "But there's more," he continued, his voice becoming more nervous. "Danielle, in the last few months, you haven't just transformed our company, you've transformed my life." He let go of her, and to her absolute shock got down on one knee. "You taught me that some rules are made to be broken, that love isn't a weakness to be controlled, but a force to be celebrated. That being with the right person doesn't complicate life. It makes it complete." Danielle covered her mouth with her hands, tears now flowing freely down her face. Austin pulled out a small navy blue velvet box from his pocket. "Danielle Morrison, will you rewrite all the rules with me for the rest of our lives?" He opened the box, revealing a stunning Art Deco ring, a central diamond surrounded by blue sapphires that reflected the city lights. "Austin," she sobbed. "I know it's crazy," he continued quickly. "I know we've only known each other for a few months, but I also know that some connections are so rare, so perfect, that waiting would be the real madness." "Austin," she said again, but this time there was laughter mixed with the tears. "Stop talking." "Why?" "Because the answer is yes," she said, kneeling down to his level. "Yes, I want to rewrite all the rules with you. Yes, I want a life of beautiful complications and impossible love. Yes, I want everything with you." Austin slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, and then they kissed, there kneeling on the Chicago rooftop, with the entire city as witness to their love. When they finally separated, Austin whispered, "I love you more than all the rules I've ever broken." "I love you more than all the ones we're still going to break," she replied. And as they danced slowly under the stars and city lights, they both knew they had found something more valuable than any professional success. They had found their person, their home, their forever. The rules had changed, but more importantly, their hearts had found their home. 2 years later, the same salty wind that had carried promises on that fateful night now danced with the jasmine flowers and white roses decorating Monterey Bay Beach. It was a Saturday morning in September, and the California sky displayed the same golden tone that had served as the backdrop for Austin and Danielle's first meeting. Danielle was in the hotel room where she had gotten ready. Ironically, the same hotel where she had stayed 2 years ago, looking at her reflection in the mirror. The wedding dress she had chosen was a work of art in ivory silk, with delicate lace details that caught the light like tiny diamonds. But what moved her most wasn't her appearance, but the small evidence of new life growing inside her. A subtle 4-month bump that the dress accommodated perfectly. "Are you ready, dear?" asked her mother, adjusting the veil with maternal care. "More than ready," Danielle replied, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. "We're ready." Outside on the beach, Austin waited beside the improvised altar, an elegant structure of light wood intertwined with wildflowers that grew naturally along the coast. He wore a navy blue suit that brought out his green eyes, but it was the expression on his face that made guests smile, pure happiness mixed with adorable nervousness. Beside him, as best man, stood Raymond Martinez, impeccable in his rented tuxedo, with a proud smile that lit up his entire face. It had been Austin and Danielle's unanimous choice. After all, without Raymond's technical interventions, they might still be pretending they were just CEO and employee. "Nervous, boss," Raymond whispered, adjusting Austin's lapel. "Terrified," Austin admitted, but his smile contradicted his words, but in the best possible way. "She's special, that girl," Raymond said, looking toward the hotel, "and you deserve all this happiness." "Thank you, Raymond," Austin said, and there was a depth of gratitude in his voice. "For everything." The guests, an intimate group of family, close friends, and colleagues from Hawthorne Resorts, settled into white chairs arranged on the sand. Jennifer was in the front row, visibly emotional, next to the board members who had become great supporters of Austin and Danielle's relationship. The music began, an instrumental version of Etta James's At Last, played by a string quartet, and everyone turned to see Danielle appear at the top of the small sand dune. Austin felt as if time had stopped. There she was, the woman who had transformed not just his personal life, but his entire understanding of what it meant to live fully. The California sunlight created a halo around her, and when their eyes met across the distance, he felt the same electricity he had felt that first night. Danielle walked across the sand with natural grace, her smile widening with each step that brought her closer to Austin. When she finally reached the altar, he extended his hand to help her with the final steps. "Hi," she whispered, exactly as she had done in that first meeting in the office. "Hi," he replied, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You look radiant." The officiant, a family friend of Danielle's, smiled at the couple before addressing the guests. "We are here today in this special place because Austin and Danielle believe that some love stories are destined to begin exactly where they are meant to flourish," he said. 2 years ago, they met on this same beach as strangers. Today, they marry as soulmates. Austin and Danielle had decided to write their own vows, and when it was time for Austin to speak, he pulled a paper from his pocket with slightly trembling hands. "Danielle," he began, his voice heavy with emotion, "when I met you that night, I thought you were a beautiful coincidence. Now I know you were my destiny." He paused, looking into her eyes. "You taught me that love isn't something to be feared or controlled, but something to be celebrated and nurtured. You transformed my fears into courage, my loneliness into wholeness, and my dreams into reality." Tears began to stream down Danielle's face. "You didn't just become my wife, you became my partner in every sense, in business, in life, and now," he looked at her belly with infinite tenderness, "in raising our family." His voice broke slightly. "I promise to love you and our baby with the same intensity I feel today. I promise to break all necessary rules to make you happy, and I promise that no matter how many years pass, I will always remember that you are the best decision I ever made." When it was Danielle's turn, she didn't need paper. The words came directly from her heart. "Austin," she said, her voice clear despite the tears, "you taught me that true love doesn't apologize for existing. It doesn't hide behind policies or fears. It simply is and demands that we be brave enough to accept it." She took his hands. "When I walked this beach beside you 2 years ago, I knew I had found my home. Not a place, but a person. You are where I belong." Austin smiled through his tears. "I promise to be your partner in all adventures, your accomplice in all mischief, and your biggest supporter in all dreams. I promise to love our family with the fierceness of a mother and the tenderness of a wife in love." She paused, looking at Raymond and then back at Austin. "And I promise to always be grateful for the technical failures that gave us the best stories to tell." The guests laughed, and Raymond wiped away a furtive tear. "Now," said the officiant, "Austin and Danielle would like to make a special promise to the new family member who is on the way." Austin and Danielle knelt in the sand, their hands united over her belly. "Little one," Danielle whispered, "I promise you'll be born into a world full of love, laughter, and incredible stories about how Mommy and Daddy met. And I promise," Austin added, "that you'll grow up knowing that love is worth any risk, any broken rule, any fear faced." When they stood up, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. "For the rings," the officiant announced, Raymond stepped forward, carrying 2 simple white gold bands, elegant and timeless, like the love they represented. "With this ring," Austin said, sliding the ring onto Danielle's finger, "I choose you today, tomorrow, and forever." "With this ring," Danielle repeated, "I choose you through all the rule changes, all the corporate complications, and all the adventures yet to come. By the power vested in me," the officiant said with a smile, "and by the strength of the love we have all witnessed here today, I pronounce you husband and wife. Austin, you may kiss your wife." The kiss that followed was everything: passion, promise, past and future united in a perfect moment. The guests erupted in applause and cheers, but for Austin and Danielle, the world narrowed to that embrace, that connection, that absolute certainty that they had found there forever. When they separated, Austin whispered, "Mrs. Hawthorne." "Mr. Hawthorne," she replied, smiling. The reception took place at the same restaurant where they had met, transformed for the occasion with wildflowers and fairy lights. During dinner, Raymond stood up for a toast. "2 years ago," he said, his voice filled with emotion and humor, "I saw 2 stubborn young people who were clearly in love, but too proud to admit it. As a man who was blessed with 42 years of true love, I knew I had to intervene." The guests laughed, and Austin shook his head affectionately. "Maybe I arranged some coincidences here and there. Maybe a coffee machine was temporarily put out of order. Maybe an old lock mysteriously got stuck." "Raymond," Danielle exclaimed, laughing. "But what I want to say," Raymond continued, "is that I could only create opportunities. The love we see here today, the family they're building, the happiness they radiate, that comes from within them. That's real, it's special, and it's eternal." He raised his glass. "To Austin and Danielle, who taught us that some rules are made to be broken, and that true love always finds a way." "Cheers," everyone shouted. Later, when the moon was high and most of the guests had left, Austin and Danielle walked the same sandy path where it all began. She carried her shoes in her hand, and they walked at the same slow, contemplative pace as that first night. "So," Austin said, "how does it feel to be a married pregnant woman who broke every imaginable corporate rule? How does it feel to be a CEO who risked everything for love and gained even more than he imagined possible?" she counter-asked. "I feel like I'm finally living," he replied, stopping to kiss her under the same moon that had witnessed their first kiss. "I love you, Austin Hawthorne," she whispered. "I love you, Danielle Hawthorne," he replied, "and I love our family." As they continued walking, leaving footprints in the wet sand that would be erased by the next tide, they both knew they had found something rare and precious, a love that had survived corporate policies, overcome deep fears, and created a solid foundation for a lifetime of happiness. Some love stories begin with a chance encounter, others with friendship that blossoms. But Austin and Danielle's story began with 2 souls who recognized each other instantly, fought against destiny for a while, and finally surrendered to the inevitable truth. They were made for each other. And now, walking on the beach where it all began, with new life growing between them and an infinite future of possibilities ahead, they knew that the best part of their story was just beginning. Love had conquered all the rules, and they lived happily ever after, not because it was easy, but because it was worth every obstacle overcome to get there. And so, Austin and Danielle discovered that some connections transcend all the barriers we build to protect ourselves. That true love doesn't ask about corporate policies or fears from the past. It simply knocks on the door and demands courage to be lived. They learned that breaking our own rules is sometimes the only path to finding the happiness that truly matters. Perhaps the most precious lesson is this: when we find our soulmate, there's no instruction manual, no company policy that can contain the transformative force of genuine love. And you? What rules are you willing to break for the person who makes your heart beat faster? If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, click the "Thanks a lot" button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing stories like this one.